And then when we get to the phones, we'll... Welcome to A Growing Concern. The subject tonight is going to be homelessness, houselessness, as some people call it. And we're going to be interviewing folks from the Me Ministries. Mike Davis on my right, as you see there. And I didn't get your last name. Alison Hilkiah. I actually remembered that. Alison Hilkiah. And she's a resident of the Lents Neighborhood out there, 92nd-ish and Foster area and Holgate. And the Me Ministries has a website, and we'll probably get that up a few times, knowingmeministries.org. And we're also going to be playing some videos from a website that is, it's a youtube.com channel, actually, and that's Invisible People TV. And there's a whole bunch of videos, interviews with folks that are either are or have been homeless, and it's Horvath. Yeah, Mark Horvath put that together, and he's done a good job with that. And he's interviewing people from all over the country, I believe, that are in a state of homelessness for a whole bunch of different reasons. So we'll get into this, and we're going to open up the phones a little bit later as well. And we'll start off with Mike. What is this Me Ministries, and how does it relate to homelessness?
Thanks for having us on the show,
by
the way. But
my pleasure.
Yeah, we discovered as we have worked with the homeless for about 19 years now, me and my family.
In the Lents area there?
Not just in the Lents area, but we started in Florida, actually.
Oh.
And
well, it's a universal problem.
Yes, it is. And we've been here since '97. One of the things I discovered is that a lot of approaches to homelessness just put a Band-Aid on the problem. And as I began to really get on the street level and getting to know people, I found out that there are a million reasons for homelessness, and each person is unique in their ability to be able to handle homelessness and their ability to get out of that situation. And so what we began to do is hang out in the camps themselves. So every day just hanging out with the homeless. And we not only work with homeless, we work with prostitutes as well that work 82nd Avenue and work with abused women. But homelessness is the majority of what we do. And by hanging out with them, we discovered that there's all these unique gifts that they have. But we also discovered from their viewpoint why it's so hard to get out of homelessness, because there is so much in society that's coming against them to sort of keep them in that situation.
Like the cost of living, mainly, probably.
Cost of living, you know. Even having a job, people say, well, get a job. As we know these days, just having a job doesn't necessarily cover rent.
No, there's a high percentage of homelessness that are working.
Correct. And so we began to, and are doing this now, to help them overcome the obstacles that they're facing. So we're not saying, okay, you need to eat or you need a job, but we're saying, what are the things that are keeping you in poverty? If it's a health reason, we'll take them to the doctor. We'll actually physically take them there and ensure that the doctors are following through on the proper care. If it's court issues, then we'll go to the court with them and help them complete their court assignment so they can get off paper and just get on with their life instead of being hung up in a specific cycle. And also just advocating for their rights, talking to leaders in the community and educating people in the area as to homelessness, and helping people see how we can more effectively approach homelessness from the ways that we traditionally do it. So it's really a street level and really getting to know them and walking with them out of homelessness.
Person to person,
Yes.
one-on-one.
Yes.
Right. And Alison, you are in the Lents neighborhood, and the whole momentum of doing this show was the fact that there has been a couple of homeless camps right there off 205 freeway, and they've been booted out. I mean, like just weeks apart. I guess they got moved from one to another, and then they left from there. And what is your involvement in all this, other than compassion, obviously?
Yeah. Well, I was kind of watching the mainstream media attention to the camps, and they tended to show a lot of litter and trash and try to say that's representative of homeless people. And I also saw on the news where they said residents of the Lents neighborhood want these people out. And I thought, well, I'm a resident of Lents neighborhood, and I actually don't mind having people who are homeless in my neighborhood. In fact, some of them are really generous and kind people that I've met, and they have things to contribute to the community. So instead of just pushing them from one camp to the next, why don't we try to get to know each other as neighbors and see how we can help each other? So part of my hope in coming on the show is to say, well, okay, I understand, you know, I'm a homeowner and we've suffered crime like a lot of homeowners have. My husband's bike got stolen. We got our kid's stroller stolen off our front porch. You know, I've had neighbors have building supplies stolen, one got their car stolen. You know, I'm sympathetic to the fact that there's crime in our area, but I'm not so quick to blame that crime always on people who are experiencing homelessness, because people who live in houses commit crimes too.
Yes.
So I'm sympathetic to that problem. However, I would like us to try to solve the problem without just saying the homeless people need to move. They need to be moved.
Just kick the can down the road.
Right, some other neighborhood. So I'm really interested in what are some positive solutions that can address the needs and concerns of homeowners, but also the needs and concerns of people who are living on the street or on the trail.
It's a real tightrope. Well, since they just did kick the can down the road this week there at the camp that was right off of 205, what's the next step for those folks?
Well,
or for you helping them?
Right. I was there that day, and I appreciate Alison and a lot of the neighbors actually helping us with that process once the people were kicked out. But we were kind of surprised by the whole thing, because a couple years ago we were involved in a federal lawsuit against ODOT for just constantly removing homeless, taking their things. So we came to an agreement of having notices in place, specific places where the homeless can get their possessions back from ODOT. But on that one particular day, for some reason, the rule didn't apply anymore. So within 15 minutes, everybody was jolted out of their sleep and their stuff gone, and they're just out with nothing. And we scrambled to get tents and sleeping bags and blankets in place to keep them warm that night. But what they do is just scatter. And then once they're scattered, they may go off of ODOT property onto city property, such as the Springwater Trail, and the city comes and says, you got to go.
That's what happened with the second one, wasn't it?
Right, yes. And so it's just this constant push, sweep, you know, just like kind of like a leaf blower effect, you know. Leaves aren't actually being picked up, they're just being blown around. And so that's what's happened from that camp sweep. Not only that, is now we've got more trauma, mental trauma for the homeless to deal with now, more physical problems to deal with, and so we end up deeper in the hole rather than coming to closer to a solution.
If people lose their shelter, it can aggravate some of their health issues, they lose some of their stuff.
Yes.
It's harder for them to find their friends and share resources.
Exactly. And it also makes our job as advocates and as neighborhood associations twice as difficult, because now you have to look for them, because you don't know where they're at to help them connect to resources, so you spend more time just looking when you already knew where they were and you were helping them. So now you got to stop the process of helping them and now just try to find them again.
Yeah, that's the same thing a Portland police officer said that I was talking to.
Yes.
Because he needs to find people sometimes for criminal reasons, sometimes to help them out.
Right.
And he said, when there's a camp in place, at least I know where to go.
Right.
And I know who I need to find and who to talk to. And then when people get dispersed and displaced, then he's in the same boat that you are, trying to track people down, and it's that much harder.
Yes.
Well, it seems to me when they kick the can down the road, they, meaning the authorities or the neighborhoods, or they kick the can down the road, they don't care where it goes.
Right.
Right. It's the NIMBY problem. As long as it's not in my backyard.
Right. Yeah. So then it becomes somebody else's backyard. And where do most of them go? Downtown? Or at least there's some services?
No, they just go wherever they can find a place to hide. And the people that I particularly work with tend not to be visible, so they're hiding somewhere in a woods, in some bushes.
These aren't the kind of folks that are
These
going to
aren't
camp
people.
on City Hall doorstep.
Yeah, they're not on City Hall doorstep. Like I said, they're not sleeping on a sidewalk on 82nd. You know, they're not visible. So, yeah, so they just try to find another spot until they're found again.
Well, I can understand the perspective of the folks downtown. They want to be in their face so that they can't just deny that there's a problem. And, you know, if they're not going to deal with it, then they're going to have to suffer the consequences of their inactivity about that. Right. And if people want to get out there and be invisible, that is another way to do it. But they're never really invisible. I mean, they still have that problem that for whatever reason they got there. And it seems to me that you both obviously have relationships with some of these people. It's terrible to me to even have to refer to them as these people because you know they're really not that much different than anybody else. And in your experience with people that are temporarily homeless, are a lot of them from lives just like the rest of us? And it just all of a sudden, you know, a couple of paychecks they lost, and it's over with for them? Because
Well,
I hear that happens a lot.
Yeah, and I hear people being critical of the homeless too and saying they're choosing to be homeless, or, you know, they made bad choices in their life and so they ended up homeless. And so I'll grant you that personal responsibility plays a role. They might have missed some opportunities, they might have made some bad decisions in their lives. But the flip side of that coin is what's been done to them. Each person that I've met, and you've met many more than I have, Mike, has just a horrible, sad story. They have suffered so much in their life. I was reading on the internet, I saw a nationwide study that said 100% of the women who were experiencing homelessness had experienced some kind of sexual abuse or domestic violence. So it wasn't just they were irresponsible or they made bad choices and ended up out there. You know, they experienced so much hardship. And that was one of the steps on the path that led them to being homeless. So, yes, people might have, you know, a drug addiction. They might have made some bad choices, but they might also be mentally ill, and it's no fault of theirs whatsoever. Or they might have suffered a lot of abuse, and they might have been just escaping, and going anywhere was better than staying in that situation. So I really encourage compassion when we talk about people who are homeless. They've often come out of some really difficult situations.
And started out that way young. Possibly.
Yeah, child abuse is a really common backstory.
And just like a couple stories, one of the homeless out on the Springwater Trail, he was a millionaire, and he lived in a nice home in West Lynn. And he hooked up with this guy in a partnership in a business. He ended up getting, you know, screwed over by the partner, lost everything. Then his wife left him at the same time, and then boom, he's out on the streets. Another guy lived in a nice neighborhood, had a nice life, lost his job, could not seem to get another job, and so everything just started spiraling. He became homeless, and he said, one day he said to me, he said, you know, Mike, the funny thing is I used to look at the homeless and I hated them. Now I am one of them. So anyone watching this program or anyone out there, you could be homeless someday. And once you're homeless, you're going to want that compassion, that compassionate touch, and people to look upon you with compassion. And so I think it's good to start now by showing compassion to others.
Well, I guess this is called the Springwater area, where the latest two camps have been disbanded, and you are possibly both of you, but I know Mike is working with the city and authorities to try to alleviate this situation. What's going on with that? Yeah,
we're trying to educate people first and foremost, but also in things like what just happened at 92nd Flavel, we have to just basically take it to the court system because it becomes a legal issue, an abusive situation that you have to deal with in the courts to stop the authorities from continuing to do this.
And you have worked with authorities in the past?
Yes.
Oh, yes. How does that work out?
Well, it just depends on who they are. I mean, there's some of them that really like what we do, and they try to work with us and help us out, and there's some that don't like what we do, and they try to stop us at every possible angle they can and make life difficult for us. So it just depends on the person.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think you've selected a couple, two videos on
Yes.
on the YouTube, and as I mentioned, it is youtube.com, but it's a channel on youtube.com called Invisible People TV. You just go into youtube.com and go up to the window and type in Invisible People TV, all one word or all three words, and you'll get a whole bunch of them and different selections. There'll be some, I guess, wasn't there some like labeled for Portland and some labeled for different cities?
They're not labeled by what city. Each one just has the person's name,
Oh,
and it's
okay.
just an
So you can
individual telling their
select it
story.
that-
They're from
select it
cities,
that way.
yeah, across the country. But we did find a couple from Portland if we want to watch one of those now.
Okay, one was called A Professor and one was Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we'll get into that, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
We're all trying to survive. We're all trying to make and it's kind of tough in a way, and in a way it's survival, but we don't really have no place to go and nowhere to sleep without being harassed. And there's a lot of feed places down here. A person can do pretty good actually, but getting back on their feet, if the economy picked up, it'd be a lot better.
So there's lots of food but no places to sleep.
Yes, the police will have you move from area to area. They don't let you really sleep anywhere, and all the shelters, they only can take so many people in.
Right. But there's all kinds of people feeding. Yeah. How did you end up here?
Well, a year and a half ago in the recession, I'm a Teamster, I'm 206 union. I was told I was safe being on a machine in a bid, and I've been working ever since I was in high school, and I'm 45 now. And I got laid off in the recession. So hopefully this economy turns around, or they put more Oregon workers to work. And so I ended out here. You know, I collected unemployment for a while, but how much longer are they going to give it to us, or are we going to be able to collect it? And the people that do try, you know, and I'm out here clean and sober 10 and a half years, but I still can't find a job that I'm going to survive on. I'm here in Oregon, and my family's waiting back in Montana for me to get housing and something going, and it's just kind of rough. So hopefully they get some jobs going again.
What was your first day homeless like?
I knew what it was kind of like but it's a different turnaround, because the last time I was drinking and using at the time, so it really didn't matter. But now, since I'm clean and sober, it's different, because you feel for some of the homeless people. You know, you care about them.
You were out here and rebuilt your life, and economy crashed, and
yeah, it crashed, and I'm out here with them.
oh my gosh.
Yeah, and
That's my story. Close to. I'm still fighting my own homelessness. Wow. If you had 3 wishes, what would they be?
Well, enough money actually about 20 million so I could take care of all the homeless people. And if they really tried, and they tried to stay clean and sober, they would be welcome to stay as long as they want, and I would pay for everything. Everything would be paid for. And if they had their animals, they'd be well taken care of, all the shots, everything. And they can come in with their animals.
Okay, wish number 2. I mean, 20 million's a pretty good wish.
A secure job that I knew I wasn't going to get laid off from.
I paid 20 million.
Yeah, that paid real well.
Yeah.
And that we owned, and my family and I owned a house, our own house, and we didn't have to get harassed and get moved out.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me.
Okay.
All right, we're back. It's kind of a happy fellow there.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there's the upside of that, is you don't have all the worries and the burdens of all the stuff. You know, Thoreau had a quote one time, or was it Emerson, that he knows all these farmers that go through life dragging their house and barns behind them. And there is a certain amount of stress involved in this consumer society with all the stuff that we have. And of course, we're talking about the other extreme of that, with people that have nothing, and then they have, like we started out talking, they have this stuff taken away from them, and they have to go out of their way to get it back. And they weren't even getting it back for a while, according to you. Now that you can do that.
Right.
So
Yes, and yeah, with what you were saying, there is an enslavement in our culture to utility companies and mortgage companies or landlords, and so yeah, that's something that the homeless definitely don't deal with, is that enslavement. But at the same time, just having basic human needs met, is really what we'd like to see. Yes, and so there's just so many obstacles that people need to be aware of that are in place in our society that are keeping people trapped in poverty. And I was reading a quote the other day that said, in order for capitalism to work, there has to be homelessness. And so, Michael Moore has been studying how to get capitalism back to its roots of non-greed, as opposed to what it's become today, just where you've got high wealth at the top and extreme poverty at the bottom. He's exploring how do we get back to the roots where there's more equality and still incentives to work.
Yeah, the incentive to work seems minimized when the cost of living is so high.
Right.
And the minimum wage is fairly low. The median, or not the median, but the fair market value right now for a 2-bedroom apartment in Portland is $912 a month.
About $450 a bedroom, roughly.
So high, and that's 64% of your income if you're working for minimum wage. So that doesn't leave people with any breathing room. They have one extra medical expense, or their hours get cut just a little bit. It doesn't take much. Could be your car breaks down to become a crisis at that point. If 64% of your income is just going to pay for your housing, when affordability is, if you're paying 30% for your rent and for your utilities, that's considered affordable housing. So people who are just working for minimum wage, that line is real thin between them and homelessness.
Right, and the cost of food has gone up to the point where it's become an issue. I remember when I was first married in the late 60s, $40 to take you for a couple of weeks, and we had a couple kids. Now, only get you through half a week. And if you're homeless, like we were talking about, the camp helps them because they're able to cook and take care of them. And what do they do if they don't have any place to collect and collect themselves? I don't know,
Yeah, the camps provide a little bit of a sense of home.
Sure.
And beyond that, a little sense of social connection. Like you have a place where you belong.
Right.
You have sort of next door neighbors, so to speak.
Yes.
You have a connection that reduces that sense of isolation. Because honestly, when most people encounter someone who's homeless, they're not real kind. And so you can start feeling really bad when people treat you badly. And if you're in a camp like that, you've got other people around you that understand the situation. They're in the same boat that you are. And so you kind of have a sense of neighborliness and a sense of human kindness there.
Connection,
and personal safety, because there's other people looking out for you. And that's the same kind of thing that any of us wants for ourselves.
And most of the homeless, like you said, they're generous people. I mean, I've seen a lot of them share with each other. Like if I got 2 coats, you take a coat, and I'll have a coat. But a lot of them, they're generous, they're friendly, they're welcoming people, they're humorous, like in the camp that got swept at 92nd Flayville you referred to, I mean, just a few of the tents. One tent had a mailbox in front of it, just to that, and every time I walked past that, I was like, what a statement that is.
What a great joke.
And then one of them had a sign that said, welcome home, sweet home. And then another tent this guy had a flower garden planted next to his tent and corn and tomatoes and stuff, but it got ripped out, of course, once the camp was swept. But still, those things, that, there is a sense of connection, and there's just not this violence and all of this extracurricular activity a lot of people talk about. It really is kind of home for them.
Speaking of home, home is neighborhood, and you're with the Lents, coming on as a Lents resident. What about the Lents Neighborhood Association? How are they relating to this?
I just went to a Lents Neighborhood Association meeting.
So you're all fired up
on Tuesday this week. Well, no, I was really impressed by the number of people who were looking for a win-win solution, that were sympathetic to the problems that led to people becoming homeless in the first place, and who really wanted to find out, we don't just want to move them to the next neighborhood. what can be done to create a place of safety for them. I was surprised because I thought that a lot of people who own houses or who live in the neighborhood would be more antagonistic toward the homeless, but people were really very kind and reasonable about it and really looking for, the best outcome for everybody. And people had some creative ideas like, well, Lents has a lot of abandoned lots and abandoned buildings. Could one of those maybe be set aside for like a Dignity Village model?
Winter's coming
or
Right to Dream
Right
too.
to Dream
Right.
too, something like that. Could that be set aside for people who, because there's a real long waiting list for housing in Portland. So until there can be transitional housing or people could actually get into permanent housing, there's going to be a need for people to camp somewhere.
Sure.
Where can we set aside so that it's legal
Yeah.
for people to camp and they're not going to get harassed and moved on? And then, of course, there is a small criminal element, and so we want to make sure that the police can find those folks if they do commit a crime.
Right.
And dispersing them doesn't help. Having everybody in one place
Right.
helps.
Well, I'll tell you, if criminal element was the issue, we'd be sweeping Wall Street.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it just depends on your perspective there.
One of the things, as you were talking about the Lents Neighborhood Association, for the viewers to know is, these things like Dignity Village and Right to Dream 2 are good. For one thing, they're self-policing, and they're trying to keep their camp clean and orderly. And you talked about the housing issue, and that's one of the things our organization does is help them get in housing, but there's a couple things that people need to realize. They say, why don't the homeless just get a job, or if we could just get them housing? But you got to consider the past. Is there debts that they accumulated in the past, and at this point, since they couldn't pay on them, the interest rates, and it's astronomical what they owe now. So you're not coming out of homelessness at zero and building up. You're coming way behind the 8 ball, trying to get to zero, so
And having
then you can get
fines
ahead.
possibly on top
They
of
may
it.
have court fines, and that reminds me, because one homeless individual I was helping, they got arrested for trespassing, and it was on public property, but they were camping. They were arrested for trespassing, and they got fines. And they had to pay $200, but they could not come up with any money, so they were fined an additional $1,200 to that
being late
$200
on
because
their
they were
payment.
late on their payments. And at that point, you're way behind the 8 ball. You're not going to get caught up. And then the other thing is, as we help people find housing in the whole Portland metro area, the Tri-County area, every waiting list is closed. So not just the available places, but even the waiting lists are all closed. And so, what do you do? It's just not there.
And when they try to do it themselves, like Right to Dream 2, they get fined out of, what was that, $1,000 a month or something like
Yeah,
that. And
right.
I guess that might be being resolved. I've been hearing different stories on that. But they want to move them under a freeway, and I guess, any place is a good place if you can collect yourself and collect people and build a little community, no matter where it is. It's better than being on the street alone
Right.
and trying to get down the road to some kind of decent solvency or whatever. Well, I see we're just a little over halfway through the program here, so maybe it's time to play another video. I think we have someone called Professor. Is he also
Yeah.
a local person here?
Yeah, he lives in Dignity Village, or he
Oh.
did at the time he was interviewed.
Oh, all right. We'll listen to the professor.
Village in Portland. Tell me about it.
Well, Dignity Village is a camp that I came to when I became homeless, and it's kind of for me, it's kind of a place where I can start over because I was homeless. I used to be a professional. Also, I have 3 engineering degrees, and after a terrible divorce, I lost a lot, and I decided to buy an RV, and I traveled the country. And then, because of gas being the way it is, and the economy and the lack of a job, I ended up here. And this is a good place with dignity, and the rules are pretty easy to abide by. And I'm just here as a transition to employment, if I can find it outside. And right now, currently, I do have potential opportunities that I'm looking into. I've been here since April of this year, and I was homeless approximately 2 months prior to coming here.
So actually out on the streets?
Yes.
Gosh. Now, you're an educated man, and in America, I see more of these tent cities. What do you think?
Well, I think there should be more because there's so many more people. You know, homelessness, most people, they don't understand homelessness. Homelessness is not just the druggies and the people that don't want to do anything. There's people out there that have lost good paying jobs, you know, whether they had a managerial job or whether they were labor or construction, and these people are losing their homes. They're getting foreclosed on. Things are more expensive. They're cutting all kinds of funds for these people, and you end up homeless, and it's pretty devastating when you're used to some kind of semblance of order in your life.
Did you, while you were on the streets, did you try the shelter system at all?
Yes, I didn't like it because it's too confining, and it's I didn't like the element basically that was there, a lot of drugs, and so I'd rather be sleeping in a tent elsewhere in the woods.
You feel safer here?
Oh, absolutely. I felt safer in the woods than at the shelters.
Wow. Gosh. Now you're on the council here, and this is a self-governed community.
That's correct.
Tell me about that.
Well, what the council is the council are people who have been members in good standing for 90 days or more, and they have a vote in regards to making decisions about rule changes, disciplinary actions if we have a member that's unruly or breaks the rules. We decide whether this person needs to be punished of some sort, whether they get a 24 out or a 7-day out or maybe just a probation until they can change their ways. And so we try to be fair. And council members have a little bit more authority. They have the authority in that regard. Now you have the members that have a vote also, but they vote in the council members.
That's the hierarchy, that's the structure.
Right, they vote in the council members.
Wow. Very cool. I mean, and to me, you know, you heard us talking earlier, it probably is that, you know, this is the reason these exist is because homeless services hasn't been able to take care of you or the other 60 people living here.
That's correct. And what I really like about this village is that we all have to contribute 10 hours a week, whether it's during security, and some people are carpenters and some people have various skills, like we have gardeners, and so we have a greenhouse and we have a security shack, and we have people that clean up the commons and sweep the areas, and so everyone has a job, and in these particular jobs, like the gardening area, they have a building coordinator, they got a gardening coordinator. And if you need hours, you go see these individual coordinators, and they'll put you to work. Wow. And that's part of the requirement of staying here. You have to contribute. You can't just come here and hang out, flop out.
If you had 3 wishes, what would they be?
3 wishes. Well, to be self-sufficient, have a job that I enjoy, not have to worry about bills, and a roof over my head, and happiness, you know, with the lack of stress.
Thank you very much for talking to me.
Okay, thank you. Good luck.
All right, well, welcome back. That was Invisible People TV on YouTube. And we're talking here with Mike Davis, who's with the Knowing Me Ministries. And on the front page of the Knowing Me Ministries, I encourage folks to go to that website and check it out. We'll talk about that in a little bit, about all the different things you can learn from there. There's a quote talking about Jesus. He says, "He defended the cause of the poor and needy, and so all went well. Is that not what it means to know me, declares the Lord?" It's from Jeremiah 22:32-16. Mm-hmm. And you know, it really strikes me as, you know, you have a lot of folks in Congress, whether it's the Senate or the House, mainly the House, And so many of these people are always talking about being people of faith, and what they're doing is they're trying to make it tough for people to vote. They're trying to make it tough for, in fact, they just did cut food stamps. And so it's refreshing to see that there are organizations that are actually doing the message, living the message that was originally given a couple thousand years ago. Do you have anything to add to that about that, since you are involved in that?
Yeah, I think the context of that, and it's so true for today, because the king of Israel in Jeremiah's day was taking money from the poor in order to build elaborate palaces for himself.
Mm-hmm.
And the prophet Jeremiah confronts the king and says, does it really make you a better king to have bigger and bigger houses? And what God really wants is for us to defend the poor, because often the poor are left without a voice. And so that's not only the things that we help with people on the streets, but that's one of the things that we do as well. Alison, myself, and others, is get the word out there, advocate, stand up for their rights, expose corruption that's keeping people in poverty. And we're really slowly starting to see that wheel turn and starting to see progress. But rather than more on a national level and in the government level, we're seeing that progress in the neighborhoods where it really matters.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're pleased with that.
You know, politics is local, and that's a good example of,
Right.
you know, if the, what is it, the lead follower would get out of the way, if the people lead, the leaders will follow. And that's
Right.
exactly what's going on, especially with something like Dignity Village. And that's what struck me when this last fellow, the professor, and he really seemed like he was too, as he was speaking, you know, what is going on in Dignity Village. And that's exactly what they were trying to probably establish out there in Lents.
Yeah, they weren't sanctioned to have a Dignity
Right.
Village
Well,
there
neither
on
was
ODOT
Dignity
land.
Village
It
at
was,
first.
right.
Right.
It was illegal for them to camp there.
Mm-hmm.
But there was an element of that. You know, Mike, you've said that if someone was in the camp causing trouble, the other folks who were camping there encouraged them to move on. They didn't
Right.
want troublemakers staying in the camp and
Yeah,
causing complaints from the neighbors. They were really trying to live there
Mhm.
peaceably and stay out of people's way.
right. And the camp did not have all of the rules in place like Dignity Village, but at the same time there still was self-policing going on. You know, and so that's one of the things that I hear a lot of homeless saying to each other is, you know, look, we're in this together, so let's not shoot ourselves in the foot here. Let's work together while we're in this. And so really do see a camaraderie. A lot of people will, you talked about the small criminal element a while ago within the homeless community, but you have that criminal element in all of
To a larger
society.
degree.
I mean, you've got a criminal element in Lake Oswego, a criminal element in Tualatin, and places, and you do in the homeless, but the majority of the homeless don't like that criminal element, you know, and they try to keep them at arm's length.
And it seems like if you're homeless, statistically,
Yeah.
you're more likely to be a victim of a crime
Exactly.
than commit a crime.
Right.
It's a really vulnerable thing, being homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people die a violent death, you know. They get
Right.
murdered. You were telling me a story recently. But when they did the point-in-time count of homelessness this year in January for 2013.
In Portland?
Yeah, they issued a big report about that. It's really insightful. I would suggest going to the internet and reading it. One of the statistics cited in the report was that in 2012, 56 people who were experiencing homelessness died on the streets, and the average age was 46,
Yeah.
which is really, really sad. That means a lot of people younger than 46 died, and that those deaths were really avoidable.
Mm-hmm.
Just for comparison, the average life expectancy in Multnomah County is 71. So people living on the streets are having a real hard time.
Mm-hmm. Was there families out there at the homeless camp?
There
Because that's-
are some families that's mostly single people because the families hide well. I mean, they're out there, but they're not with the rest of the homeless community.
Because you might get your kids taken away from you, right?
I mean, my wife and
Oh,
two
right.
kids, we were homeless for a year and a half a couple years ago, and we had to hide because we didn't know what organizations would do if they found out our kids were homeless. We just didn't know.
Some of them might try to help you, but some of them might report you to DHS.
Exactly. And so families typically, they're out there, but they're not mixing in because they don't want to be found out.
Mm-hmm. I know there's a great number of folks that experience homelessness that have children, and I don't. It's kind of a conundrum. I mean, yeah, take the kids away and maybe give them some decent food and a shelter over their heads, but then they don't have the love of their parents.
Right.
So I think of the two, I think being near their parents are probably the most important thing, unless they're abusive and you have other issues
Right.
involved.
Helping the whole family out of poverty would be
the way-
better
would
than
be the way to go.
taking
And there
the
are
kids
good
away.
organizations that are working specifically with homeless families, such as My Father's House and others that are doing a great job with that. And so we're pleased to see that. But, you know, the startling statistic for me is that the average age of a homeless person in the state of Oregon is 5 years old. So,
Really? The average?
yes, age is 5 years old. So you know there's a lot of
young
homeless
people.
families
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
there, and you know they're everywhere. You know they're
Well, and a lot of them
parked
don't
in
get
your
counted
neighborhood.
because they're couch surfing, or
Right.
you know, when there's children
Right.
involved, sometimes friends or family members are willing to kind of take you in, and you can sleep on the floor or whatever, and you have to move around and use what social support system you have,
Exactly.
and so they don't end up on the streets where they are literally homeless and
Right.
get counted.
Right.
Which is true too for people of color, are really overrepresented in the homeless population, but a lot of them, because of historic prejudices or whatever, are trying to stay off the radar screen, and they don't contact social service agencies
Right.
or places they could go to get help, and they get undercounted, but they are overrepresented. There's
Overrepresented, sure.
yeah, a greater percentage
Right.
of homeless
And
than
yeah, and like in the point in time count, when that was going on while we were homeless, you know, they would say, "Hey, we're doing the homeless count. Are you homeless?" And I would just say, "No," because you don't want to be found out. And for me as a man, and I know all of the men who have families that are living on the streets, there's sort of a pride there, you know, like, man, you know, my family's homeless. This
I
is
wish I
really
could take
hurting
care
me,
of them.
and so I'm going to figure this out. You know, and I don't need them helping me or whatever. So there's that struggle as well among homeless families.
Sure. We talked before the show. We talked about maybe bringing up another video. So in the control room, they may see if they can find another one. It's up to them to select one, and if we can get to that in a little while, we will. That way, we'll have it ready. It's pretty important to try to discern the dynamic of it, and it's not an individual dynamic. I think mainly it's a social dynamic, and to me it seems almost like a function for bigger cities. 'Cause I don't know. I don't think that Baker or Bend Bend's a big city, but some of your smaller towns, do they have issues like this? Do you know?
Well, actually, they do. I mean, like in places like Burns, which are, they don't really have any other bigger cities around them, and their economies are going down. You'll see that, and in logging communities. And, you know, to get out of the state of Oregon, I've got a friend that lives in Massachusetts who helps the homeless there on the Massachusetts-New Hampshire state line, and there's no major cities around there, but there's a lot of homeless out in the woods, and so, yeah, they're there.
Tough times coming up then with winter coming on.
Yes,
They have winter
for
there.
them.
We don't.
Yeah.
We go.
Right.
We have winter, but it isn't winter of the magnitude of the Great Lakes regions and the East Coast.
Right.
Terrible up there. So I don't know if they've found one. They'll give me the high sign if they do, and we can maybe go into another video. And we'd also like to open up the phones. We're down to 15 minutes here. Nothing's happening yet, huh? Oh, I guess we're not having any luck. All right, so we'll just move along. Well, you know, if we're not going to be able to get another video, we can open up the phones. We've got 15 minutes or so. We can talk about. Oh, I guess we have one. Back and forth. This is the yo-yo hour here.
Yes.
All right, so let's go to another video. I don't know which one it is, so this is kind of potluck for all of us.
I'm getting my life put back together now. I'm 69 years old. I traveled the coast. I landed up here in Portland. My friend told me about the street groups, and that's what got me started in selling. And I've been selling about a year and a half now. And I was down on Alder, 6th and Alder, I asked my boss if I could move up to here, 6 and Morrison. He said, I don't see why not. So I come up here and my profits went up about 75%.
So this is a better corner
This is a
for
better corner. I still got my morning crew that comes through,
it. Right.
and I get a lot of afternoon
Yeah.
down there from about 10 to 2. Traffic just died down.
Right.
But here, I got them all 4 corners,
Very cool.
and I love it.
Good.
It gets me something to do. I'm not sitting around someplace. I really enjoy the meeting people.
Now, what's it like being a senior? I mean,
What's it like being a senior?
out here homeless. I mean, this is no way to end retirement, to have retirement, you know?
I know it. Just meeting people that I haven't met before. You know, I got a lot of friends now
Right.
that help me out every chance they get.
Where'd you sleep last night?
I was under the Burnside Bridge.
You slept under a bridge.
Yeah.
If you had 3 wishes, what would they be?
Try to get my own apartment. That's the main thing right there. Yeah.
Number 2?
Number 2, keep my health up as much as I can. I got a bad heart. I think being out here in this fresh air, meeting people helped out. They all encourage me.
Yeah.
Keep up the good work.
And your 3rd wish?
Third wish would be trying to help others. Give them the courage to, hey, there's things to do out there instead of just sitting on a corner panhandling, like I call it.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you very much for interviewing me.
Great. Invisible People TV. I love that Invisible People TV concept. We'll put up the phone number. And Mike had a little comment about news media, which I think is really good to hear, because I ran across the same issue with the forest community being interviewed by corporate news.
Yes. Yeah, I think a lot of times when it comes to social issues that are covered on the news, such as the recent camp sweeps at 92nd Flayville, don't believe what you're hearing, because it's highly in favor of the authorities. I was interviewed by a couple channels on that news sweep, and what I said in their interviews and what actually aired was greatly twisted. So you got to pay attention to what's going out there and do your own research and find out what's really going on.
Yeah, you know, you always got to keep in mind that the news media is not objective. It is not, you know, dispassionate. It has an agenda, and they can make, in the narration that they're giving the story, they can make it, you know, make what you're saying sound completely different than what you're actually trying to say. And it's something to know, because I know forest activists had this issue, and they won't even back in the days when they were putting up pods and they were, you know, doing tree sits and stuff, they wouldn't even do interviews, because they would always make them seem, these activists seem something that they were not. We got the phone number. We got almost 10 minutes. 288-4448. Hopefully we'll get a couple calls, and we generally do when we talk about homelessness or houselessness, as some of the folks downtown like to call it. Either way, you know, you're talking about the same issues when people don't have a place to collect themselves, and I think it's one of the downsides of, you know, one of the many downsides of our wealthy culture, that we have so many people who are destitute, and all they're looking for is a hand up. And Alison here and Mike Davis, they're both trying to do that. And do you feel like, Alison, you had any effect to work in that direction?
Well, I'm a relative newcomer to the effort compared to Mike, who's been doing this work for, you said, almost 20 years.
Yes.
I did write a long letter to the director of ODOT after the recent camp eviction, and I got a very polite and lengthy letter in return from the Region 1 manager. Nope, and he signed it. But it basically said, you know, we're going to keep doing things the way we've been doing them. So I don't think that I was able to bring about any change. But I'm not going to stop.
No, you might have to go over his head, because sometimes that's what it is. It's just like they talked about the Dignity Village hierarchy. There's hierarchies you have to deal with.
Right.
And so the phone number is up there, 288-4448. You know, sometimes we hit questions, sometimes comments, either one, because this is an issue that's probably in the news in, you know, one way or the other, you know, several times a month. R2, the Right to Dream 2, was they take up a lot of news space on that. But there's other ones going on. You know, I don't remember seeing any of this in the news. Was this covered in the news? You say you were interviewed.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Was it?
And real recently, ODOT just dumped a bunch of giant boulders under a freeway overpass where the 205 freeway goes over Foster there to prevent people from camping there. It's horrendous. I mean, people think a homeless camp is an eyesore. They have a different aesthetic than I do, because those boulders, are so ugly, and that was just reported on real recently.
Oh, okay. So I had seen the flashing light, so I think we have a call. We'll get the first caller on the air. First caller, welcome to the program.
Yes, I have a question for everyone. What is the religion community doing here in Portland about the homeless? I know St. Francis feeds the homeless, but we don't hear anything about the Catholic Church or any other religious community and what they're doing.
Sometimes people who are of a faith background and are making an effort don't necessarily say that they're religious. Portland tends to be a pretty secular city, and they want everybody to feel welcome to join them in the work. So I know there's a few organizations that are coming at it from a faith background, but they don't necessarily broadcast that information.
And I know that some of the churches are like working in their local neighborhood together to provide various services to the homeless. And there's a lot of churches of various faiths that are using their buildings as day shelters, some of them as night shelters for families. And even some of them, we've seen this in the news, where some of them are using their parking lots so that families are sleeping in cars can stay in the parking lot. So there's work going on in the faith communities, but rather than like a citywide effort, a lot of it's more localized to their specific neighborhood.
Is there anything going on in the Lents neighborhood?
Yeah, an organization I really like called Operation Night Watch. Actually, at that same corner we've been talking about, 92nd and Flavel, they're out there every week, every Friday night. They feed a lot of people. A friend of mine who does that, volunteers there regularly, said when they started doing it, they might just have a dozen people show up. But lately it's been 75 to 100 people that they're feeding on a Friday night, and offering companionship and friendship, because, you know, houselessness is only part of the problem. It's all the other things that you lose when you're out on the streets as well. So they're trying to make up for some of that, give some social connection and a sense of belonging. And that same Operation Night Watch, I know, also offers a meal and a time to hang out at the Clackamas Service Center on Saturday nights. So there's 2 nights in a row that they are out there in that same Lents neighborhood.
Yes, and then you've also got, there's an organization called Second Stories, run by Clark Blakeman, and they are helping the communities of faith there in Lents to pool together their resources to work with not just the homeless, but the neighborhood in general. But Lents Baptist Church is kind of leading the effort in the 85th and Woodstock area to try to get resources pooled together to help the homeless.
Pilgrim Lutheran is another one that I've heard is doing a really good job.
Right.
Well, caller, thank you for the question.
Thank you.
All right. It was good because that brought out, of course, obviously the knowing Me Ministries is, it's not a particular, is that a particular religion? Or is it pretty much just...
Yeah, well, my family and I were Christians, but we work with all people. And
So it's not
rather
Methodist or
than working with a
Presbyterian.
specific group, we're really on the street level. So, yeah.
Sure. Well, they're all pretty much, I mean, people who are outside it, my whole life I was raised, I was surprised to find out that there's Christian and there's Catholic. I didn't make any distinction.
Right.
When then President Kennedy was the first Catholic, it kind of woke me up.
Yeah.
It's always the same thing to me, but people will kill each other over minor differences in doctrine.
Right.
Look at them, the Sunni and the Shiite.
Right.
They've been going on for 1,400 years. So that was a good question. I'm glad you brought that up. So we're down to about 3 minutes. We can sum this up. We can leave that up in case someone might want to come on and ask another question. Might sum up. Alison, you've been doing this for a short time. We got another call. Get the next caller up. Caller, we got about a minute.
Hi.
Hello, you're on the air.
Hi, I'm calling and can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're on the air. You got about a minute or so, minute and a half.
Yes, I'm calling because I really appreciate your having this show, having this show on homelessness. I
Thank
lived
you.
through homelessness maybe 20 years ago with 2 toddlers.
Wow.
As an ex-battered wife being stalked by my ex-husband.
Yeah.
And it was just really traumatizing and a huge loss. And like Mike Davis, I felt a great deal of fear about losing my children. Right. Fortunately, I didn't. But it certainly changed my point of view, made me aware of a lot of things that were going on that I hadn't known about. And I live in senior housing close to where they were going to move right to Dream 2 under the Broadway Bridge. And it's just been really interesting, the reactions that people in the building have had towards the people who might live under the bridge. And there were a lot of fears, but I think they've come around to being more compassionate. But also there's another issue of when you get out of homelessness and move into subsidized housing, how you get treated there. That I hope will be addressed as well.
Well, I appreciate the comments because we're down to about a minute left of the program. So thank you very much for your comments.
Thanks so much.
All right, thank you. Well,
I think the caller really drove the point home
Right
that
home.
it's fear that holds us back from compassion usually.
Yes.
And we can each make the world a better place by overcoming our own fear and then encouraging our friends and neighbors to do the same.
Yes.
That's a good way to end. So you got a 15 or 20 second soundbite?
Okay, yeah. So we're Knowing Me Ministries. You find us at knowingmeministries.org, and that name, Knowing Me, means that we get to know each individual homeless person, prostitute, or abused woman that we work with. And we just encourage you to just get to know those people, and you'll find out the amazing stories that are behind those faces.
And you can find out some of them stories by going on the website, knowingmeministries.org. There's a lot of information there on how you can pitch in and help out, because there's a lot of work to be done. So thanks for tuning in. I want to thank the callers. I especially want to thank the guests. And I want to thank the crew. And we'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you, Jim.